officially call to order this meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee on March 6th, Thursday night at 6:30. Our sole order of business tonight is to go through the open space plan. Hey Harry, do you want to pull up a chair and join the table, because you were part of this report and we could sure use your input. Come on in.
If I can remember what happened, yeah.
We have a couple of guests here tonight, so just for the record and for our viewers, I'd like to try to introduce them, or rather have you introduce yourselves.
I'm Tom Lotzenheiser. I'm a resident of Easthampton and live on East Street by Mount Tom, and Mass Audubon Central Western Regional Scientist and naturalist, ecologist here in town.
Okay, those are all things that put you high in my esteem.
I'm sorry. Can I get your last name?
It's Lautzenheiser.
H-E-I-S-E-R?
Yep. Lautzenheiser.
Very cool. And then we have Harry Schumann.
I just had to show up to see what's going on.
We're glad you did. But you were also
I'm a member of the planning board.
and a member of the group that put this together. In fact.
Yeah, I was recruited to get on the recreation and open space because they had to have a member of the CPA, the Historic Commission, and the planning board. I had a member of all three, so she had a trifecta, so I went, so she had all three represented. That's why.
So I'm going to now give a little bit of rundown for your benefit of what we're trying to accomplish. This is our master plan created in 2008. Last time you shared with me, would you mind sharing with it's Tom, right?
Yes.
Okay, with Tom. I'm sorry. You can say no. But okay.
What's the
Sharing the chapter, let them see a little bit of the book.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Page 86.
Yeah.
I was just looking for the page.
I'm also a member of the Pascal Trust and I'm board, and I participated in review and.
So you were part of this in
Well, I wasn't formally part, but I helped out. I think Marty Klein was on it.
Yes.
Sue Waltz were on the open space part of the master planning, subcommittee. Is that right? And so I, helped him with that, and I met with Bill Cannon and Marty at some point to talk about mapping and all that stuff. So I'm somewhat mostly familiar with the content.
Great news for us. We put off to the end the chapters that we weren't as familiar with, and we knew that this was coming out.
Yeah.
And we're going through this entire book, and we're catching up on these sections and really trying to isolate specifically the ends of each chapter that detail sort of the macro scope of the goals. And as we go through this, we're trying to figure out, okay, now we have this new document. How does this affect the older points?
Right.
And we're, in other chapters we've been able to go through, we've got this little schema that we've come up with. Is it something completed? Is it in progress? And apply to this. But is that even appropriate, or should this supplant it? Mm-hmm. And we need to kind of come up with a plan to merge this chapter, to merge these two documents. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of the first case in which we may possibly alter the master plan in any way, which really is not our purview. It's to kind of determine where we're at and then figure out what to implement.
Yeah.
But because of this document, we're kind of in a conundrum. Things have really been modified. So my hope is that just in terms of a strategy, we can do a couple things, and I'd like to hear input from the other committee members too on what you think. I'll propose something, and then my hope is that you'll come up with something better. So I think we should go through the items that are in the master plan, determine whether they're defunct, whether they're appropriate, whether they're in progress, and as we go through these items, have our experts bring in new information from this document so that we can modify these fields. And then when we're done at the end, I'd like to ask a broad, open-ended question as to what's not in here that's now in here. What items should we be adding?
And Harry, when we were doing the open space and recreation plan, we didn't turn to the master plan open space section to say, oh, what does this say, and how do we?
No. All we did was make an up. We had the thing has to be done like every 6 years, 7 years, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So she had to do that in order to get grants from the state. That's why I had to update it.
I see.
But it had nothing to do with the master plan that I know of.
Okay.
And we
So-
really didn't pay much attention to the content of the open space section of the master plan and the preparation of the open space and recreation plan, at least that I can recall as a committee member. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly some of the descriptive text and things could probably have been excerpted from the full master plan document.
Okay.
Can I ask what data you did use as to, I assume there were other data points or,
To inform the open space and recreation plan?
yeah, was there a survey conducted?
Yeah, there was a survey and a public meeting, so there was a fair amount of public input.
Did the PVPC actually draft it?
Yeah, and Jessica and
Pioneer Valley Planning.
PVPC, who's I'm not remembering her name.
I can't recall every belonged to anything that was so organized. That was scary with those people. With Jessica, the lady from Pioneer Valley Planning,
And Capra.
the lady from Conservation, the chairperson of the Conservation Commission.
Melissa.
We had another lady that was like just a regular public walk-in. She attended every meeting. And the guy from the rail trail was on that committee. And it was Parks and Recreation, a man was there also.
Okay.
I can't think of his name offhand.
It's possible PVPC may have, in the drafting, because they would met with you, discussed it, had conversations, open meetings, talked about it, that when they actually did the final drafting, they may have...
I think we on the committee weren't involved in too much of the writing, you know. So I think Anne probably borrowed pretty liberally from existing materials, like this one where.
So there's a good chance that as we go through these points that you may say, oh yeah, that's in the new plan, that's in the, or
Yeah.
you may say, nope, never heard that before, and
Right.
that's kind of what we're looking at.
What I got a chart was what they had and what they proposed and what's been done and what hasn't been done. You'd be surprised after 6 or 7 years. In some cases, there really wasn't that much done.
We've encountered that a lot throughout
You know.
the document.
So a lot of stuff that wasn't done had to be implemented like for the next 6 years. And what can actually be attainable? You know, what's actually feasible.
Shall we go through them and see where we're at? And I just want to make one additional comment before we do that. I did try to contact Bill Cannon. He replied to me, but he's at the upstairs meeting today. But he's very interested. And one comment that he made about this that I just want everyone to be aware of is he said, do you know if anyone's done anything with this document? And of course I responded, well, we're doing something with the document right now, but other than that, I don't have any.
Well, it was hot off the press, you know, and it's like stamped and approved, I think, in September.
Yeah, this isn't late at all. This is pretty new.
Yeah, it's a half a year or something like that, right?
Yeah, so
All right. So our note takers will try to follow along, and I don't even know if we have our list of codes, so we may have to make them up. But our first item in our booklet here is to write and adopt a local wellhead protection plan. We've come across this one many times with Michael. And as I recall,
There's been no progress, right?
there's not a whole lot. I know that...
I have
Oh,
plan proposed
right.
left at discussion between
Discussions.
Baypack and Water Department.
Yeah, discussion stage, I think, is where that is. It hasn't really
Blocked
been...
agreement between.
Do you have any... we sort of have, on this committee, Michael, I can't pronounce his last name, Zerwick? Yeah, help me out, okay. Zerwick, thank you. Great guy. He's with the DPW.
Water.
And, you know, so he's been filling us in on that, so I think we're fairly well covered, unless you guys have anything you want to add. Okay. So we'll put that as discussion stage. For number 2, compile a list of important uplands in need of protection. Revisit, update existing inventory of important views. Well, just for clarification, what's an upland? Is that
upland is a non-wetland area.
Okay.
And at least that's how I would interpret it, but it's possible that they're thinking of uplands in terms of higher terrain in the city.
And I think when this was done, it was before a lot of Park Hill was preserved.
I'm
So
talking
I
about
think that-
views,
Yeah.
would seem to be elevation related.
76, goal number 2, goes a little further to say, preserve remaining important scenic vistas. These areas are important elements of community character and help to define our feeling of place. Strategy 1, consider adoption of viewshed protection district bylaw or upland development bylaw. Include setback and existing regulations, amend as necessary. So this is, I think, yeah, the latter, it's sort of more about protecting views.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there such a list?
Yeah, and I think part of our process was to, in the open space plan, was to look at sort of priority areas in the city. So somewhere in here, there should be a map. It doesn't. I don't think it like necessarily identifies
The views, per se.
individual views.
I wasn't on the open space subcommittee, but I was in the group that divided into those 5, one of which was open space. And I do seem to recall that the concern was primarily about the rock face of Mount Tom, the idea that that was something we wanted to preserve. I think that
Okay, so we're not talking about homes and their views and neighbors putting up large houses.
we're really talking about
Yeah.
elevated land.
All right. Well, that helps. And I know that, we have one obvious one, but would a list then go down further into different spots on the mountain? Are there places other than the mountain?
Well, certainly, I think part of Park Hill, I think, would fall under scenic. I mean, my wife just took a time-lapse video from one of the orchards up there of the sunrise over Mount Tom, and it's like, wow, that's not scenic. You know,
Is that up there art in the orchard?
Yes.
Is that what we're
Yeah,
talking about?
exactly. Is even some of the sculptures are, out in the field in the movie, but.
And we tend to be biased towards Mount Tom, but we do have other high elevated, I don't know if they qualify as mountains or hills, but in the other direction. I always forget the name, but there's another one in the other direction.
Blasphemy. No.
I know, yeah. But it is. You can see it from here.
So I think the answer then is we're aware of them, but there's no lists that they're in need of protection, that there's really no agency that's protecting them. Or is that true? I mean, Parks and Rec, I'm sure, has some sort of, standards for, closing the park, making sure people don't wander around or go off the trail. I'm not sure exactly how to rate this. Normally it's, at least in some way, cut and dry. Because if we say that something like, Parks and Rec's standard behavior is protecting them, I think we're not doing justice to any forward progress on this issue. I think.
I guess I'd put it this way. It seems like there isn't one unless either of you say, oh yeah, there's such and such.
Well, we got the Pasquamic Trust, who's bought parcel of land all over the city, and that's put away.
Yeah.
That may not necessarily be on the mountain, but it's it's all over the city. Over on Ranch Avenue, we have a real nice section over there. 2 sections they bought, probably about 35 or 40 acres.
Yeah.
You got another section over on East Street. You have the Brickyard Conservation Area.
Right next to it, I hike it regularly, and
Right.
I
I
love
mean,
what you guys have done.
there's quite a few areas in town that's been put aside.
Well, in terms of Pascomic, we have, roughly 12 properties, about 190 acres or so. And they're scattered, throughout town, but mostly concentrated, along the Manhan. And then a few in the, on the flat, and so forth.
So in
But
terms
we
of
have-
upland,
But we have goals, as a vision for the trust. It's like we have different priority areas, and certainly protection along the Manhan rises to the top of one of our priorities. But the equal to that, or just under, would be protecting the the slopes of Mount Tom, along East Street and Hendrick Ave. So,
But is it, then it sounds like there's not a formal list yet, though. That hasn't been
we
formalized
have,
into it.
yeah, I mean, on the trust, we have, parcel level prioritization, that internally when people call up and say, oh, I'm interested, hey, I've got this property and I'm thinking of moving or whatever, are you guys interested? And we compare where they are with our list, and if they're not in our priority area, it's like, well, that's great, but maybe.
But you do have Mount Tom and you do have Park Hill.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that sounds list to me.
And those are
Some
I think that's-
reflected. And those are reflected in this open space plan. In that, here's the Mount Tom protection area. Pretty much everything on the slopes of Mount Tom. There's the Manhan River Greenway, and then there's farmland of statewide importance on Park Hill. So, and I think, to me, the Park Hill protection area.
That
So-
seems like those elements have been defined, maybe not defined specifically as upland, but some upland elements have been defined
Yeah.
as part of the overall protection plan. Some progress sounds good.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Compile an inventory of farmlands with ownership information, protection status, vulnerability, etc. Meet with owners to explain available options / importance to the community. So we're talking specifically about farmland here, which I don't think we have a huge amount of in Easthampton.
If I remember right, there was a list in there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Should be a list in there.
I think we did. I don't know if we have a specific list of individual farm landowners, but we did identify the areas that are, prime agricultural soils, and those are even on this map. So everything that's in this kind of green shade is prime ag soil.
I think we should go some progress again and note no ownership info. And on 2 and 3, we might want to note too Pascomic Trust, because
Yeah,
that's
I
where
did.
this is being held.
Yeah. So the next, it's an easy exercise in GIS to compare the prime farmland with the parcel data, because Easthampton's parcel data is really good now, and digitally available. So
That would get us to the
that would get you to the
comment that we've come to again and again, needs leadership.
Yeah.
Someone's got to actually take that step and do it. But that's our next step after we identify.
So I've put some progress on identifying the parcels, but no communication with the owners.
Yep, sounds good. Develop an educational process for city board members so as to inform about what constitutes important and functional set-aside open space. So I think we're talking cross-community communication here. Well, this is city board members. Right?
I assume that's for decision-making purposes, that there's no, I don't know, our city board members are going to be, yeah.
Well, UMass Extension runs a program called Keystone, and every year they run it. They're always looking for municipal board members, and it's kind of it's a couple of day thing, training where you learn about. Hi, Bill.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for stopping by.
Yes, sir, can.
We should have an extra chair over there somewhere.
Learn about conservation biology and forest management and open space conservation and so forth. So that's something that's available to anybody in the area. It's a limited program, but they really look for community leaders, town board members, planning board members, things like that to participate, because they feel like those are the folks who are going to have the most impact.
Okay.
So that's a resource that's out there.
Keystone. And I think that document too helps, although it's not really, it's educational, it's not being pushed as a method to educate. Any other ideas for developing an educational process for city board members to inform them about open space? No? So maybe some progress on that? Keystone exists. I don't know that it's specifically for us, but it's enough. It's a
resource.
It's a resource.
I guess I would also say that, Mass Audubon has an office in town, and we're conservation leaders in the state. So if people feel like they want input, just send an email, pick up the phone, and I'm happy to contribute how I can.
So I'll add, resources are available,
Audubon.
etc. Needs, I don't know if we want to say leadership, but something hasn't happened yet to get the people to those resources.
Well, as it's listed as this develop an educational process,
Right.
which hasn't been done. So there's resources that exist, but there's no, this is focusing on the connecting piece.
Right,
That's
I
not
agree.
done.
Resources exist, no formal process to bring people to them. So,
Got it.
maybe even discussion stage on that. I'm not quite certain. Do you guys have a recommendation how you want to rate that? Bueller?
It's all in there.
All right, good enough. All right. Integrate Natural Heritage Biomap Core Habitat Map into existing residential/commercial development regulations. Adjust zoning maps/districts to recognize these critical habitats. So help me out. A Natural Heritage Biomap Core Habitat Map. That's a mouthful.
And that should probably be in too.
Page 86.
So we're mostly just trying to figure out where things
86?
ought to act.
So
I'm sorry.
So Biomap 2 is the statewide sort of identifies the statewide lands of conservation priority, essentially, and it does that through two methods. One is kind of a landscape-based method, looking at large blocks of contiguous forest or other open space, undeveloped land. And the other is looking at rare species occurrences or natural community occurrences, things like that. So those layers overlap. So the core habitat is the kind of biologically focused one, and that in Easthampton is primarily around Mount Tom and through the Manhattan corridor. There's a little bit of biomap habitat, I think, in some of the areas around National Pond or the park, Nonotuck Park, and
So this is to integrate this into residential commercial development regulations
yeah, so that
and then adjust the zoning maps. I don't know that that's been done in any way. I know that there's there's new zoning regulations that they're working on, right? New zoning's coming out. But I don't know if this has been taken into effect. So I think we need to vet that with Jessica, unless someone knows.
I mean, Biomap 2 has no regulatory,
Authority.
aspect to it. It's just information.
Okay.
So unless if a municipality, wants to use it as a regulatory tool, then there's nothing stopping them from doing that. But that's not built into the overall.
My guess is no progress, but I think we need to say vet Jessica to find out because she'd know what the zoning process, or maybe even the zoning committee.
I mean, isn't there enough in terms of the state regulations and everything else that kick into any kind of encroachment on those biohabitat areas anyhow?
Well,
Something that's controlled on a zoning basis, everything else may be duplicative. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you're talking about those core habitats, most of those are triggered in general by some kind of rare species occurrence. So there's like a few dragonflies, turtle species, mussels, things like that that are commonly triggering rare species habitat in Easthampton. And anytime anyone, whether they're zoned one way or another, who are proposing work, this isn't biomap core habitat, but in priority habitat designated by the Natural Heritage Program has to comply with the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act.
Do you agree then that even though it's not specifically the biomap, that there really is a redundancy? It's as you say, duplicative?
Yes and no, and it's certain. I think that there are elements of the biomap designation that even of core habitat that fall outside of priority habitat. So, and it's like, so I would think that, I say that they're kind of complementary, and I guess it depends on what the city's priorities are. If people in town feel like it's important to maintain sort of maybe certain natural community types, and by that I mean certain assemblages of plants and animals that sort of occur in a certain landform, basically. And that wouldn't necessarily receive any legal protection.
Okay.
So if the city could decide to expand
The biomap would go further.
its coverage to include that in those areas where there aren't rare species, or they might decide to implement protection of rare species habitat in a different way than the state does.
Okay.
That's a decision for the city.
So vet with Jessica, some coverage exists in the state.
Right.
Under the state Endangered Species Act, there is a regulation, that's part of a subset, say, of the biomap core habitat.
Okay.
But other elements of the biomap core habitat are not sort of in regulated areas.
The only thing I could add to it, I know when we were kind of writing these up and everything else, was that, gee, it would just be nice to have somebody cognizant of these kind of things if they're kind of proposing developments and everything else, to be, sensitive to these areas, if there's an opportunity to extend them without too much of a hardship, but at least the whole idea was for everybody to be cognizant about different issues, and in this particular case, some of the wildlife and environmental habitats that would be adjacent or surrounding potential developable areas, that they could at least be sensitive to be more aware of it. Maybe somehow it gets incorporated somehow and everything else. So
Yeah, you can see that in the language where it says to recognize these critical habitats.
Yeah, it's not necessarily to, do any much extra in terms of protection, but I think it would be good if there was kind of a flag that said, okay, you're working in a part of town that has some interesting aspects to it, try to massage your plans to identify those or to work with those instead of just plowing them over or whatever. I think,
Okay.
that sounds like a good goal to me.
It sounds like there's been no progress though on this, so for our purposes, since we're just trying to see the status of things, it really doesn't think.
I concur. Overall, no progress. Vet with Jessica, potential overlap with existing regulations. Number 6. Continue to utilize Easthampton's Open Space and Recreation Plan from 2005 and Mass Natural Heritage Biomap Core Habitat Mapping as guides for future preservation efforts. Priority lands identified in the past, unless since preserved or developed, should continue to be targets for future protection. Update existing maps of priority/preserved lands. There's a lot of different things going on in there.
Seems like it's just preserve what has been preserved, though, if I could summarize. I mean,
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It just says
keep preserving.
keep on keeping on.
Updating the maps and things like that. That's an ongoing.
Plus, you've just done that, right?
That's
It seems like
All the maps have been updated around that, on this thing right here. So we spent a lot of time on that, gathering all the information, all the little trails that are out there, all the little parks, like Root Park over there on Northampton Street. That's what it's called, I think. It's a Root Park.
Oh, yeah.
Catherine Root,
Yeah.
yes.
Root Park,
Yeah.
stuff like that, Knott Duck Park, anything with any kind of landmass at all, and all the trails that are here and there are all part of that whole thing.
So ongoing and new open space document 2013.
to reference.
All right. Consider adoption of a viewshed protection district bylaw or upland development bylaw. Include setbacks in existing regulations, amend as necessary. Okay, a viewshed protection district bylaw. So we're talking again about upland and about view, probably the same locations we were discussing before, and a bylaw to create setbacks. In other words, trying to preserve the view, right? I'm unaware of anything that we have specific in Easthampton regarding that.
That got squashed.
Can I, I'll bring up a really, really tough, Marty Klein and I put together some test regulations for the side of Mount Tom on East Street. And boy, I still remember it. I got welts. I still have welts from that meeting. But it was a lesson, and we learned about it. Were you?
I was part of that.
And Marty and I spent a lot of time, working out regulations to kind of cut back on some of the building that really you can kind of see from miles and miles and miles away. From setting it back, from the color of the houses to, berming it slightly, all kinds of things. And we spent a lot of time on it. We got to the meeting and the landowners up there, the Dudas and everything, it had struck a chord with them, and they were, maybe there's another way to do it and everything else, but it was an extremely, extremely upsetting meeting. And it wasn't taken very favorably as to what our suggestions were trying to do or anything. They own the land, and I understand that.
It would have only been new construction that would have been affected, right? I mean,
But that's still...
It's still, it's a nice idea, but from what I've gathered and everything else, and based on my experience, it's very, very idealistic.
Okay.
And, something that, we can kind of keep in here, but I don't know, unless there's some other...
You could say we considered it, we tried it, and...
Well, yeah, I mean, it just, I think it's a noble effort to try. I mean, we have other efforts now in trying to, we have the transfer, the TDR transfer districts and everything else where, we've identified the mountain slopes there to be highly desirable in terms of transfer of development rights and everything else as one way. As maybe a better way, more subtle way of doing things and everything else. And, people are allowed to buy into that if they want to or not. That's a good thing.
when was that meeting you had roughly where you proposed that?
Just at the end.
4 years ago?
4 years ago? Okay.
It was a while ago. Yeah, it was a while.
I would say it'd be more around the time that the master
2008.
plan.
It was right at the end.
It was probably within a year of the master
2008.
plan.
Okay.
So what I have written, tell me, is a proposal was made and rejected.
Say the least. It was,
No progress since.
but
No progress since.
I don't know.
Tell us.
I feel like there's got to be, there's a way of doing that strategically. I think that might have a different result.
Perhaps. It's not unheard of. I mean, some of the regulations that I research are in place, like in Wilbraham. They have those view shed regulations down there. Yes, there is. And
And
everything
you guys
else.
did a nice job, I think, putting it together. It just maybe was
Well-
sort of the way that,
But right now, what we're not rejecting ideas or anything like that. What we're basically doing is just trying to assess where are these now.
yeah.
And this is great information that I
Yeah.
didn't know, so
Yeah.
I'm very grateful.
Yeah, it's an anecdotal information
Yeah.
there that, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, moving forward. Number 8, create a part-time city conservation assistant position, partly funded by developer exactions, to develop stewardship and other open space related activities. Developer exactions, I'm guessing, we're talking about the fees that you pay to the city for permitting and such. Would we increase those in some way to fund a position? Which seems like that'd have to be a fairly significant increase. I can imagine there'd be some resistance to that, unless I'm misunderstanding what they mean by funded by developer exactions. Any comments on that? Could that mean something other than what I think it means?
There's been no progress, I assume.
Yeah, anyone know about a part-time city conservation assistant?
Well, I know that it's been talked about, and it's been based on conversations I've had, like with Jessica and everything else, where their time is really kind of stretched out, and everything else that I mean they could use somebody like that. There are certain activities that are going on in the city that really take up a lot of time to kind of run around and chase and follow up on, not to mention anything beyond that at this point in time. But
So just
I don't know of a community that doesn't have at least a part-time
really.
liaison, except for the small towns like Worthington and everything else. But
So some
most of them
discussion-
still do. But I think that should
Would the
stay
C-
on the list and
Would the
you know.
CPA be the place? And I mean, that seems like the group that would push something like that, right?
I think the Conservation Commission would be.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, my bad.
Some discussion, no action.
Yeah, bring up with the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
Or some discussion and need no action.
In need of action.
Yeah, it would seem like they'd be the group to say, it's time to put this forth, we're going to vote in motion, and we're going to try and, go to the city council or whatever and make that happen.
It's a big budget issue. Let's put it that way.
That's what struck me right off.
There are some models where different towns are sharing conservation agents. So one person would have, 2 or 3 towns that they would cover, or, depending on the workload, of that town. But I think-
Yeah, and that's where they would come in part-time. They'd do part-time here, part-time another.
But it's easier to do part-time when they're getting hours and other. I think we should actually note that. It might be useful in future conversations, that position sharing.
Tom, does any municipality stick out that they're using that kind of?
I can't think of them specifically right now, but I know that, right locally, there are a couple that are doing that, and it may be even...
Belchertown's full-time, isn't it?
I think, yeah, for sure. And
Okay, yeah.
I think, it might even be Worthington or something like that. I mean, some of the...
Are we the odd man out? Are we the only ones that doesn't have someone except
Well,
for the really tiny
Northampton has staff.
Yeah.
And, I would guess that Holyoke does, and
Sure.
I'm not sure about Southampton.
I
I
doubt it.
don't think so.
Yeah, but
Maybe there's an opportunity for us then.
I mean, given the size of the community and the pressures, building and everything else, that
It's tough.
it might be needed to guide some some development.
I think the second thing that the agent can do is, if they're not immediately responding to applications, they can start to sort of take care of the other stuff that the commission isn't getting to, like stewardship of the conservation properties. And, it's a real capacity improvement to have even a part-time person.
This really strikes me too as one of the goals that we should highlight or put an asterisk next to, because it seems potentially obtainable and one of the things the master plan might be able to achieve in moving forward. That said, let's move to the next item. adopt stormwater ordinances and low-impact development standards to be applied to all future developments in the city.
Well, we have a stormwater ordinance. So, yeah, I've already had to work through that several times in developments, so, that's good to see that that's in place.
Do you know when that came about?
A couple of years ago.
After the plan, okay, good.
Yeah. Low-impact development standards, I think we still always we're talking about those and everything else. I'm not sure. There were some standards that were looked at, and I think the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission was helping them a little bit. They were kind of dubiously called green standards or something.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yes.
Some of it was, I even kind of, when I was listening to the initial presentation of it, some of the regulations that were starting to crop up were pretty detailed and pretty
Burdensome on the developers.
Well, they required a certain level of expertise to implement them. Let's put it that way there. And they were saying in the regulation, any homeowner can file for this stuff. It's not going to be that burdensome. And I'm looking at the regulations. I'm saying, no, they can't.
It has to be balanced.
Because there's issues about solar orientation and impervious coverage and drainage and everything else that I don't believe that you can just kind of like expect a homeowner to kind of comply with those things without having some kind of professional help. So therein lies some of the burden of financial burden too, especially to an individual homeowner. Maybe I don't know where those regulations were kind of ended, but at the time, they seemed like they needed a lot more work. I'll just leave it at that.
I would say partially completed and ongoing.
The stormwater ordinances exist.
Yes,
Yeah, that's the complete.
and is required for permits. For any kind of stormwater system.
Okay, so then that's complete, and then the LIDS is no progress.
Well, the green standards. I know that
Some progress?
Some progress. Okay, that's fair. I think that's fair. It's certainly not there yet. Okay. To ensure protection of sensitive areas in future developments, include dimensional setback and design standards to increase buffers, exclude wetlands from open space calculations. Yeah, help, guys, help.
That's a zoning, I think that has to be kind of, I know Jessica's been talking, I'm sorry, my 2 cents worth on it is that some of that stuff can be integrated into the bylaws, the revisions to the development standards and the bylaws. And, everybody knows here that there's a lot of pressure to kind of update these zoning bylaws and everything else, and there's a lot of ambiguities in it that have to be straightened out. Errors, all kinds of things. And I think if that process is going to go ahead, then there's a process that's going to go ahead to kind of improve them too. And I think some of these kind of ideas could very easily be incorporated into the revisions of the bylaws.
And may well be happening already in that process, right?
I don't know if anybody has, started that ball rolling with, revisions to the bylaws yet. It's a lot of other things that are going on and everything else too, so.
Okay.
And I think that might really need some funding help to get somebody involved in helping with that,
In practice, there have been better implementation of open space setbacks or cutouts and things. in some of the developments.
You know, Tom, it's one of the things that when I practice my site design and everything else, it's the first thing I look at is, how can you kind of integrate, developments with open spaces and everything else, so.
But that's good developers more than regulation.
And I think it's the city saying we're not going to accept, like, for example, the classic in town is the Plains area where
Yeah.
Pascomic owns some land that's like 10 feet wide
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that are totally
It's
useless. They're
like-
totally useless to anything and anybody.
it's like to count that as open space is,
Right.
on the map, you just see it as kind of ridiculous.
So in terms of rating this, dimensional setbacks, open space from calculations, has it been done? I don't think so. I think
No.
this is no progress.
But could a caveat be put that could be looked into in terms of, the zoning bylaw regulations, revisions?
I think that's a great idea because it gives us some degree of understanding where to turn. I think as we go through this here and we're on number 10 and we're looking at 29 of them, we're going to maybe get through another 3, 4, I'm hoping, if we're that lucky. And that's going to put us in a situation where it certainly has occurred to me that we're going to continue to need your expertise. We'll likely meet again in 2 weeks, so I'm hoping that you all might be able to come back for our next meeting to help us conclude this chapter. I know it's asking a lot, but you've been very, very helpful. So having said that, let's see how much further we can get. Number 11, determine the total number of acres of critical lands remaining in the city that are determined to be worthy of protection. Set a goal to protect the percent of acres of those lands /year. Utilize Easthampton's open space and recreation plan, the old one, 2005, for guidance. Determine the acreage of critical lands that are worthy of protection. Well, you've done some of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, Pascomic has not explicitly come up with a number of acres, but we're a step away from that, I would say.
And with regard to this set of protection percent of acres of those lands as a goal, an annual goal, maybe they didn't do it as a percentage of acres, but is there an annual goal for how much further in protection that the group is going to?
Not an annual goal on land trust. I mean, it would be outstanding if the city would formally recognize that and kind of adopt that. I wouldn't,
Okay,
that
so,
would be extraordinary, really.
so no progress.
Yeah, I would say.
I mean, that's another thing where, maybe some of that, could be incorporated into the development standards in the zoning bylaw that, 5% or 10% of land shall be committed to, open space that, within the development type of thing,
I read this as, it says talk about critical lands remaining. It's like, well, we're done, we do that.
For a well-developed community. I think we should take those comments and put it in as well because it'll give us some direction of where we might look to solve the problem. Those comments are really...
Can we rephrase it?
Zoning bylaws, 10 to 15% help me out, Bill.
Percentage could be adopted for developments.
I think this is a little different than a sort of blanket zoning thing. This is looking at, where are the really critical lands in the city and how do we get those protected? That's what I'm reading here. So
It's not just more
It's-
protection, it's
right.
like
how do we get the ones that we need to get? And to me, it's like we've laid out what I think we prioritize what we feel like we need by highlighting Mount Tom, highlighting the Manhattan River corridor.
The question is how to protect them.
The question is, if those are our critical lands, how do we go forward with protecting a certain percentage of those on an annual basis? And I think if we were able to bite off a substantial portion of those per year, boy, we would really be achieving something in the city. At least, in terms of preserving ecosystem processes and,
Is that another way of saying, while it's a noble goal, it may be an unachievable goal?
I guess,
Well, the problem is, Tom, is that, we know where they are, right?
Right.
We know exactly where they are. But unfortunately, the protection doesn't necessarily get promulgated unless there's some action.
Well, that's
Like in development. Unfortunately, it just doesn't get, volunteered,
well, that's right.
so to speak.
But this goal says set a goal to protect, some percent of acres of those lands. So it's like, and he gets to say no progress. We don't have a goal.
We don't.
We don't know what the percentage would be. Realistically, the way land protection works is often, reactionary. It's like a threat comes up and you jump in.
Yeah.
All this whole thing boils down to the landowner. That's what it boils down to. If somebody owns some property and they're going to sell it, they may offer it to the Pasquamic Trust, or they're going to give it to a builder, we'll say. Okay? All right, so they're going to look at the property, they're going to do what they want to do, and then they put their plan in front of the Conservation Commission. And if there's anything wrong with it, whether there's water around here, wetlands, whatever, it's their job to nullify the project. If it's not, there's nothing you can do about it. I've been part of the planning board now probably for about 6 years, if not longer. I can't remember exactly when I got on that thing. But that's what it all comes down to. The landowner. If the landowner wants to preserve the land, it doesn't matter if it's critical or beyond critical, whatever it is. The land is not a swamp. Then you can't build on it because the Conservation Commission will not let them build on it.
But I would say, Harry, that it's more than just kind of negating. It's trying to guide whatever development happens in there to, to offer some aspects to it that would preserve some of the lands that have kind of been earmarked.
If somebody has a piece of property and they're willing to conserve it, well, then you got it made because the state will put up.
And that's what TDR does too.
Yeah,
TDR does that too.
Motivations for homeowners, basically.
Right.
Well, we could do chapter 61 is probably underutilized in town. Get more people.
What was that, Tom?
Chapter 61, it's a state program where people will, whether forest landowners or recreation, other types of undeveloped open space, landowners will get a tax break for enrolling their land in this program. It's a state program.
It's not the agricultural preservation.
There's
the
a
APR?
No.
Okay.
But there is an agricultural segment of Chapter 61 too.
Okay.
So,
that sounds cool.
and then if the landowner decides to sell the land, the city gets right of first refusal. So again, it's still responsive.
That's like the development rights. You're giving up the development rights on it for a tax.
No, because a landowner can voluntarily withdraw from Chapter 61 at any time,
Okay.
unlike an agricultural preservation restriction or conservation restriction where once you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah.
But then you have to pay a penalty on on the taxes that you avoided by being in the program.
So can I just make the observation that it's obvious that when we get to the implementation stage, this is exactly what we need.
We're going to have a lot of
knowledgeable people who can make proposals about how we
Let's
might
see if
attain
we can
these
hit one
goals.
more and get
Sorry
to
to
the
take
next.
too much
No,
time.
this is great. Let's see if we can hit 12 tonight and end on that note.
All right.
Continue to work with landowners to acquire critical lands in fee or through APRs and conservation restrictions and donations. Educate residents, city officials, landowners, and developers about the importance and benefits of preserving open space, as well as various options available, using city website, public forums, media, and other means. So this is really what we're talking about, things like educate them about things like Chapter 61 and other options. And how much education have we been doing as a community to our landowners?
Well, And then Pascomic does stuff like
That's all Pascomic Conservation does,
Outreach.
right, Tom?
we try to do outreach. We've got our newsletters. We try to raise attention when we have a transaction. The trail opening, like on Ranch Avenue. We
So
try
ongoing?
to be. Yeah, I would say ongoing.
I would say the PCT is just ever so vigilant. And boy, they are the greatest stewards going in terms of,
How long have they been
open
in
space
operation?
preservation and everything else.
1982.
82, okay. So it's been
Yeah,
for a while.
it's a passionate organization. There's a lot of people that spend a lot of time,
That's true.
doing this. And I know for a fact there's a lot of people also that spend a lot of time trying to maintain, the trails, and they're starting to open some of them up for public accessibility, which is a big thing with them, because if you don't have public accessibility, you can't promote public awareness, and then you can't promote the appreciation, for the open spaces and everything else. So it's just a domino effect.
I
really.
personally have loved what you've done with the expansion Brickyard Brook, and every now and then when you go through this list, most often we come across all these items that nothing's been done, we're not moving, but every now and then you come across something where you just know it's critical, and it's great to hear that it keeps moving. Go ahead.
Well, I can share that last year at this time, 2 members of the Conservation Trust, the Pascomic Conservation, came to the high school to talk to the high school students about their scholarship and to talk more about what the Pascomic Trust does for their work and their mission and everything. So reaching the youth is very valuable for educating our community.
Couldn't agree more.
Oh,
And
progress.
so
Progress.
so there has been some activity
We
for
have
that,
to put
right?
everything into a category. Progress.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, about
But,
this time,
yeah, John-
scholarship time, yeah.
John
And someone else.
I love this group, and we're going to meet in 2 weeks at this time, 6:30 on a Thursday, and I hope that we'll see all of you again, because we sure need you to get through this chapter. You're very knowledgeable and helpful.
I'm
And
sorry, we belabored it here.
not at all. Please. It's a good meeting.
So we rarely get through a whole chapter anyways.
No, yeah, it usually takes
And
2
we
meetings.
do when we don't know anything.
This was when we went through the master plan process. This is what we did. John and I were on this committee, and we not only took on open space, but we took on recreation, we took on historic, we took on like 5 aspects that our group did. And everything else. We were bullish on the whole thing. It was crazy.
Well, unless there's something else anyone wants to discuss, I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
And move that we adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you very much and have a great night. Was there any further discussion about what material, do you want to hit the button first? Okay. What materials they're going to use in the boardroom? No metal, right?
For coming.
Well, I brought up the use of a